The first story in this podcast contains material that may not be suitable for younger viewers. It is my recommendation that parents listen to it first before they let their children listen to this podcast. It's mainly just the first story. The last three are pretty bland. But the first story, parents, take a listen before you let your kids hear it. Now let's get on with the podcast. My name is Cameron Buckner, and this is the What If It's True podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, it's the Dixiecryptid podcast. This podcast contains 4 strange events that were all written by my friend out west, who, the more I get to know him, the more interesting he becomes. I can't tell you much about him because he really likes to stay behind the scenes. But he is, of late, just flooding me with accounts that he has recorded or events that he's observed. He was a UFO guide. He worked in the paranormal industry. Actually, it's an industry out west, and would take people on guided trips to observe things in the night sky and other things that happen in the paranormal realm. And from all accounts, he was very successful. He delivered what the people paid him to do. And he's recorded a bunch of these in stories, and he sends them to me periodically. He has a book or two that is written. I think he published it at one time, but he took it down. I'm begging him to republish those books because I would really love to read them. I'm like, man, please just send me a copy so I can read it. I won't share it with anyone. He's like, no, I need to do some work on it. Anyway, these 4 events are from one person. I think you're absolutely going to be fascinated by these accounts, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, here we go. The story I'm about to share with you was told to me by a good friend one day back in 2008. However, before we get to her experience, I need to just put this out there. You may be triggered by what you're about to hear, but just remember she is sharing what happened to her as best as she could piece it together, and that with many aspects of her account, she was oblivious to what was happening until after the fact. In UFO circles, a close encounter of the 7th kind, or a CE7, is commonly referred to as human-alien hybridization. In other words, it's the creation of a human-alien hybrid being, using either sexual intercourse or via artificial methods. Typically, when you hear traumatizing accounts of alien abductions, it pertains to these artificial methods of extracting ova and sperm from those involved, and then be used to create a hybrid baby. In biblical circles, the idea of aliens or fallen angels interbreeding with human women is commonly discussed with references to the book of Genesis in chapter 6, where the Nephilim, the giants, and the sons of God, the angels, bore children with women. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, the Holy Bible, English Standard Version. And now on to our story. To the best of my memory, she began, I don't remember asking for this to happen. After a pause to collect her thoughts, she continued. A short 6 months after I moved into my new home, I awoke with strange cut marks just below my belly button. They looked a lot like incision marks, but I didn't understand where they came from or where I cut myself. The night before, I slept undisturbed, and if I had any dreams, I didn't remember them. And there was also no pain around the area of the cut. The cut marks quickly disappeared by the following morning and left no scar or indication that anything had happened. If I hadn't noticed them the day before, I never would have known something happened, she told me. While visiting with a close friend a week or two afterwards, her friend noticed something different about her and asked, "Are you pregnant?" as she reached out to touch her on the stomach. This friend of hers was a well-known local psychic and intuitive, and she continued, "Your aura is indicating that you are with child." Well, I didn't know how to respond, she told me. On the one hand, I knew I couldn't be pregnant because I hadn't been with anyone in quite some time. And on the other hand, I respected her gift and I didn't want to tell her that she was nuts. That's the only option that made sense, so that's what I went with. "You're crazy," she responded while letting out a nervous laugh. "I haven't been with anyone since I moved here." And with that, they changed the subject and finally parted ways. Over the days and weeks that followed, she said, I began feeling a powerful connection to my son. She told me that the feeling led her to dig out an old photo album and then replace a flower photo she had framed on her desk with his photo. And after not speaking to him for a lengthy period, she decided to reach out to him. This was a difficult decision for her to make, as it was my understanding that after his birth, she chose to put him up for adoption to protect him from his abusive father, who didn't want him. She had since divorced his father, so that helped her feel a little more comfortable talking to her son after so many years. She had no idea what she'd say or if he'd even want to talk to her, but all she knew was that she was suddenly grappling with a very powerful urge to connect with her son. In the months ahead, she recalls seeing unusual weight gains as well. She ate healthy and told me, "It just didn't make any sense. My lifestyle remained the same, but the weight just kept adding up. Nothing I did made a difference." And then, one September morning, while sitting at her desk at work, a man she didn't know entered her office while looking around for something or someone, and when he noticed her, he said, "You're the one." Now that he had her undivided attention, he continued, "Did you know that you're implanted?" "Where or in what area of my body?" she asked out of curiosity. He then made a circular motion in front of her stomach and he said, "In this general area." He told her that he was in the construction business in Chicago and had received an important message for the Hopi elders. He got in his truck and drove out to the four corner areas of Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah to meet with them. And on the way back, he said he received another message that he'd know who to give it to when he saw them. All he knew was that he couldn't meet with the Hopi until after passing on this second message. He continued, "I've been driving all over town, visiting shops, looking for you." I didn't know what to say, she confessed. I didn't know this man from Adam or understand why there was such a pressing need to tell me I was implanted. From her understanding, implants were usually found behind someone's ear, in their sinus cavity, in a leg, the back of the arm, etc., but not in the general area of her stomach. The strangeness of their meeting was added to her growing list of unexplained things for which she had yet to make sense of. She looked at me with a smirk and then continued. At this point, I still hadn't made the connection of implanted, really meaning impregnated, and all the hints I'd so far received. Skipping ahead to September 2009, exactly 1 year after first meeting this construction worker, he returned with another message for me, she said. "Did you know your implant was removed?" he asked. "No, I didn't," she replied. Unlike their decision to leave the cut marks behind when they implanted her, they left no sign of removing the fetus. The only hints would have come from her intuitive friend, her realizing those heavy maternal feelings were gone, or from someone like the man from Chicago. Another struggle she had to deal with was the biological loss after the fetus was taken. As a woman and as a mother, having previously navigated maternal and biological changes to support new life, she later struggled mentally, emotionally, and physiologically with the sudden changes of that new life suddenly being taken from her. It was during this part of her ordeal she began putting the pieces together. Additionally, imagine how she may have felt knowing she didn't have a say in the matter, and as with most, if not all, abductees, there are still many questions to be answered, such as, why me? Finally, no conversation about alien abduction or hybridization could be complete without bringing up how Jesus was conceived. Even after generations of indoctrination, some people still refuse to accept that the Virgin Mary simply awoke one morning with child. Might there be another possible and even plausible explanation? In the book of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, it says, "Now the birth of Jesus took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being just a man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, 'Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.' All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. 'Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel,' which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus." The Talmud of Emmanuel, the teachings of Christ, is an ancient document discovered in Jerusalem in 1963. It was found in a cave encased in resin and had remained buried there for 2,000 years. As this document in so many ways goes against long-taught biblical ideas and endless revisions, church scholars and academia are largely opposed to its contents and claim it's a hoax. One of their major sticking points is that within the Talmud of Emmanuel, Jesus' biological father is identified as none other than Archangel Gabriel, returning us yet again to the debate of angels being ETs and the fallen angels being the negative ETs. It also raises the question again of the validity of all those hybridization experiences reported by abductees. For some, it's easy to deny their stories because of differing beliefs. For other people, though, it appears to explain in very simple terms how a woman such as Mary could awaken one morning impregnated with the Son of God. If, over the years, you've heard accounts of Noah's Ark being located, chariots, spears, and bodies underneath the narrowest point of the Red Sea being found at the crossing point of the Exodus led by Moses, the site location of the burning bush, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the tabernacle, the golden calf worship, etc., those were by a man named Ron Wyatt and his sons in the 1980s. You can search on YouTube for all those incredible discoveries by Ron Wyatt and the full accounts. Here, however, I'm going to touch on Christ's blood sample and how the test results relate to our story. In early January 1982, Ron discovered a dry blood sample in a cave beneath the site of Jesus' crucifixion. The blood had apparently made its way through the crack in the rocks below the cross and dripped onto the Ark of the Covenant, which was hidden there in the cave, being protected by 4 men who claimed to be angels of God. One of these angels instructed Ron to take a sample of the blood from the mercy seat and have it tested. He did as instructed and took the sample to a trusted laboratory in Israel to be tested. The technicians knew nothing of the sample's backstory or who Ron was, just as they needed to test it to see if it was human. And it was. And per his request, they further tested it in a growth medium at body temperature for 48 hours, knowing full well that it was dead blood. As Ron Wyatt says, dry blood is dead blood. Everyone knows that. They can test the blood of the pharaohs, the mummies. There are certain things they can do. They cannot get a chromosome count. There's no way I know of to get a chromosome count out of dry or dead blood. You can get DNA and some other things, but not chromosome counts. When the tests were complete, they said to him, "Mr. Wyatt, this blood has only 24 chromosomes in it. Everybody else has 46. 23 from your mother and 23 from your father, 22 autosomes from your mother and 22 autosomes from your father. You get an X from your mother, and you may get an X or a Y from your father." This blood had 23 chromosomes from the mother's side and 1 Y chromosome only. They continued. The child could not have developed if it didn't have the autosomes from the mother, so all of his physical characteristics were determined by his mother's side of the family. His maleness was determined by this 1 Y chromosome that came from a source not a human male. And then they continued, "Mr. Wyatt, this blood is alive." And then they asked him whose blood it was. Ron Wyatt answered, "This is the blood of your Messiah." So here we have test results showing a human mother with an unknown father counterpart. In 2005, I met a woman who told me that many of her past lives had been revealed to her. Or maybe a better way of saying this is that all of a sudden she had access to memories of different lives that she had lived throughout time. Of interest here is what she told me about her relationship to the Sasquatch species. Like so many abductees, she recalls vividly laying on a table in a craft with beings standing over her. What is unique to her experience, however, is that she had been carrying the very first Sasquatch creation, and after they removed the fetus from her, her only question was if she was good enough. In her case, she evidently knew she was playing a role in whatever was taking place. Could this really be possible, though? Could this human woman be the original mother to the Sasquatch species? Around 10 years ago, I heard an interview with a man named Richard Stubstead. The show discussed DNA testing of a toenail and 2 other samples they believed to be from Bigfoot. All 3 samples were from various locations here in the United States. The mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, results from our ancestral grandmother, passed down from mother to mother to mother over tens of thousands of years, reveal that samples 1 and 2 are similar to subglacial Europe or 15,000-year-old DNA data on record. Sample 3 is different, he said. Its mtDNA is believed to be upwards of 40,000 to 60,000 years old and out of southern Africa. The male counterpart's nuclear DNA, or nDNA, for all 3 samples revealed an unknown source. In other words, DNA analysis revealed the DNA from these random samples all had a human mother component, while the father was unrecognized within all known genomes. Richard Stubstead also stated that over the last 10 years, all evidence believed to be of Bigfoot DNA is 100% human in terms of female mtDNA, and the male's DNA in each instance is always unrecognized or unknown. As part of the ongoing alien abduction saga and contact scenarios, many female abductees report later being introduced to extraterrestrial children who they strongly believe to be their own offspring. They even feel a very deep love for them, such as a mother would experience. But as of the time of this writing, my friend has yet to meet her implant. Event number 2, New Year's Eve 2009. After reaching our destination, a group of us stood beside the property fence talking. And before long, one of the couples broke off from the group and pulled me to the side with them. We walked down the fence line a bit so they could talk to me in private. They informed me of their plans to return later that evening after the tour was over, and that coming out with me was really about showing them how to get there. And I asked them if anything were to happen, if they would contact me. I also wanted to see their photos in case anything was to appear in them. Before we rejoined the group, the husband snapped a flash photo of a corner where two fences met and where we were just talking. In that photo was a silhouette of a man invisible to the human eye. He was on the other side of the fence and appeared to have a cigarette or a toothpick in his mouth. This reminded me of a photograph taken in the same location back in the 1990s by the previous homeowner. And in their flash photo, a humanoid figure was clearly seen leaning against the fence, but his face looked flat and he had large yellow eyes. Was this the same guy? And was he just listening in on the conversation about them sneaking back later that night? You know he was, and boy, did he have a surprise waiting for them, as you will see. We drove back to the shop and everyone said goodbye. A few days later, I received an email from them, and here's what they wrote. While standing not far from where we took the photo of the invisible man earlier that night, my wife suddenly felt all of her hair stand on end. Something or someone is right behind me, she told me, and we need to leave immediately. As we began to walk back to our vehicle, we felt someone following us, and fear really began to sink in, and we quickened our pace. And then out of nowhere, we estimate a dozen coyotes were only a few yards behind us. They were forcing us into a full-on sprint back to the vehicle. Those coyotes were so close, we could hear them panting right behind us at our feet, but when we turned to look, we didn't see anything. Well, this freaked us out even more, so we started running as fast as we possibly could. We made it back to the truck in one piece and never did see those coyotes, and we raced back to the motel. It was around 1:30 a.m. At 3 a.m., the walls of our motel began shaking violently, lasting more than 10 minutes. At first, we suspected someone next door banging on the wall. However, we heard no one talking, which was unusual because for the whole week we always heard conversations on both sides of our motel room. The walls seemed surprisingly thin, so this did not make sense. The next strange thing happened the following day. This time it was around 5 a.m. From the same motel room, we heard a loud humming sound throughout our room for almost 30 minutes. It was strange because when we walked outside, no humming sound was heard, and as soon as we walked back into the room, it was loud again. Well, we suspected that it was a washing machine or something. However, when we checked the laundry room, it was actually located on the other side of the motel, and the sound we were hearing was only in our room. Before checking out, we asked about complaints from other guests, but no one complained of hearing that noise or similar noises either night. When I visited their motel to see if room 119 had a history of poltergeist or other paranormal activity, they said that it used to. But because the attendant hadn't heard of any recent activity, she believed it must have been some time ago since the last haunting. Honestly, I don't believe the motel was haunted. I just wanted to check to see if there was a history in that unit. I also think someone out in the ranch decided to have a bit of fun with them and keep them from getting a good night's sleep. After all, they were the only people ever to admit being up to no good and wanting to go back and look around when nobody was looking. You keep us awake, and we'll keep you awake. Event number 3, April 20, 2010. Possible abduction, Arizona. On the evening of April 20, 2010, a woman living outside Phoenix, Arizona felt drawn to look outside. When she did, she saw a circle of lights in the sky near her home, which grew very bright or intense and then disappeared. She admitted that all she remembers is it being solid black inside the ring of lights and that it might have actually been hollow. Moments later, strange lights appeared in her bedroom, and she recalls falling down on the floor, but when she awoke sometime later, she was laying on her bed. She added that after waking up, she felt sore inside and she was very weak. She also noted having missing time. Looking back outside, she saw 4 helicopters flying nearby as if they were looking for someone, and afterwards she fell ill and went to the hospital. She had become severely dehydrated and needed 4 bags of IV solution, and she had a 105-degree temperature. Nurses told her all indications were that she had a bacterial infection. Looking back, when the lights first appeared, she said she felt like they were coming for her, and now feels alone and empty inside. Even though her housemates awoke from the lights and noises, nothing happened to either of them, and when she tried talking to them, they simply listened and smiled without saying anything. In the days since this event took place, she reports still feeling weak and continues to have nightmares, where she only remembers seeing dark shadows walking around her before suddenly waking up and crying, her heart racing, and also being short of breath. When asked about her family's history of encounters, she said that to her knowledge, no one in her family had any. In many cases, family members do have a history, whether discussed openly or kept secret, of abductions, contacts, or sightings. Memories of such events most often include sightings and missing time. Less often are memories of actual face-to-face contact, either on board a craft or near the observer's home. Some even report having no interest in UFOs or are indifferent to the idea. She added that she considers herself spiritual and knows things, some of which she doesn't want to know. For example, she said she knew what day that her father was going to die, as well as when she would die too. Once, a spiritual reader told her that she had been visited by an angel when she was 12 years old. Currently, she feels that her life will never be the same. She wants the nightmares to stop. She's afraid to look out her bedroom window at night. She also wonders if some part of her is missing, as she feels empty inside and unable to explain why this happened. Event number 4. One afternoon, a local researcher came into the store to share her time-lapse photos of strange craft photographed over the area in the early morning hours. We talked for about 30 minutes or more about the craft, the ascension and trajectory, and possible viewing locations for further sightings before she hurried out the door for another meeting. Just as she was closing the door, another woman who was already inside and waiting to talk was introduced to me. She said triangular craft were gliding quietly into the area near her home on a nightly basis. She was on her way out of town for a while and she wanted us to take the keys to her home, and she asked us to take as much time as we needed to document her reports. When we looked up her home address online, we noticed right away that her home is in the general area of the flight path reported by the researcher who had just left. We also found statements online regarding underground military installations nearby, in addition to the woman's claim that NASA was coming out the following week to investigate. Sounded like fun to us, so we loaded up our camping gear and we hit the road the following afternoon. When we arrived at her home, we noticed that it was situated on the side of a fairly steep hill, so pitching our tents was out of the question. The surrounding trees were also pretty tall and would most likely prevent decent camera footing of incoming craft, so we decided to head for another location about 15 minutes south of her home. We arrived at the campground about 1 hour before sunset and hurried to get everything set up before dark. Our one campsite was actually comprised of 3 adjacent sites, so we were able to spread out and set up various equipment in their own space so as not to get disturbed. It also allows us to keep the equipment out and ready for when needed at a moment's notice. Just after dinner, and when it was dark enough, everyone gathered together in order to hike up the side of the nearby hill. When we found a small clearing, we all stopped and found a comfortable position to lie on our backs and look up into the night sky. It was while in this location that I felt a presence just up the hill from our group. I wasn't the only one who picked up on this, as one of the 2 dogs also sensed it and became distracted. I didn't hear or see anything. It was more like sensing when someone is looking at you from a distance. Somehow you just know when you're being watched. I took the dog and walked 50 feet further up the hillside, stopping where it felt like someone had just been. The dog looked around nervously and whimpered a few times. I looked around for a fallen tree and decided to sit down for a moment. Looking back toward the rest of the group, I tried to get a feeling of what it was like being quietly observed from this location, and I comforted the dog by assuring her it was all right, and a few moments later, we rejoined the group. All the while, I had the feeling someone or something had moved to a point just over the crest of the hill. 5 hours later, the 3 girls resigned within their tent a few yards from the fire. Their tent was an open sky model, meaning the roof of the tent was made of a screen fabric similar to the window covering in order to allow occupants to gaze at the stars from within the tent. Around midnight, I was in my tent changing clothes when I heard the girls yell that a UFO was hovering directly over their tent just above the trees. My tent also had an open sky view, but I was further over on the first campsite and unable to see what they were talking about. By the time I was out of my tent, the craft had moved away and out of sight, being blocked by the tall pine trees that surrounded us. I asked the girls what happened. Evidently, a circular craft hovered briefly over their tent as if waiting for them to spot it before leaving. Once they saw it and started yelling, the object began to move slowly to their left. This meant it was heading in the direction of the clearing everyone was at earlier to skywatch. They described it as being a black circle craft with red and orange lights rotating around it, with a ring of white lights rotating in the opposite direction within the ring of red and orange lights. None of the adults saw what the children described. For some strange reason, all of us adults were off in different locations and distracted by some task when this happened. For example, I was away from the group and inside my tent putting warmer clothes on. Others were putting things away for the evening, and one person was setting up a telescope in our third campsite. When the girls saw the craft, everyone else was effectively disposed of in remote locations away from the girls' tent. The pine trees were so tall and thick that you couldn't see the sky above another campsite, even if it was the one next to your own. The interesting thing about the whole incident was the direction in which the craft headed once the girls saw it. I hadn't told anyone about my experience of being watched up on the hillside, so it seemed more than coincidental that the craft headed back up the hill toward that spot. A couple hours later, the children were asleep and the rest of us were once again doing our own thing in various parts of our campsites. Two of us spent some time doing astrophotography with a telescope, and when we finished, I returned to sit near the fire. This was when I noticed strange behavior from two of the others. They were talking about something and were very quiet about it. When I asked what was going on, I had no idea the answer was going to keep me up for several more hours. The woman explained that while she was cleaning up dinner items and putting things away a little while earlier, she noticed a strange light. A beam of white light came from the hillside where we were earlier and stopped at her feet. And when she looked down at her feet and at the light, she entered into a trance-like state and without telling any of us, began following the light through the woods and up the hill. As she walked through the woods, she knew she was going to enter a craft and that she would be okay. In fact, she said the light made her feel giddy and safe. Moving further and further up the hill, she said she knew what was about to happen and that she was going to board the craft, and she wished the rest of us were with her and could join her in the contact and a flight in the UFO. This is when it dawned on her that she was alone. Her motherly instinct also kicked in, and she was worried about who would take care of her daughters while she was away. And in that moment, she said she yelled out my name, and the light disappeared. The trance was broken, leaving her to wonder where she was and how to return to the campsite. Still feeling a little foggy, she decided to just head down the hill and look for a road and then our campsites. It was at that point she informed her boyfriend of what happened, and that's also when I arrived at the fire and noticed them talking quietly near their vehicle. I approached them and asked what was going on. After sharing her incredible experience with me, I grabbed a flashlight, my camera, a set of the night vision goggles, and I told her to show me where it happened. I wanted to see where the light was coming from. The two of us headed back up the hill, and in a matter of a minute or two, we had already lost visual sight of our campsites. Incredibly, she took me to the location where the dog and I sensed someone observing us, and from there we continued up the hill and to the left. As strange as this may sound, the trees appeared to form a hallway, and she confirmed that was where she was when she broke free of the trance and the light disappeared. We continued up the tree-lined hallway until it stopped, hoping to figure out where they were leading her. And right there in front of us was another amazing sight. A strange circular clearing was made by cutting the trees, and this was located on the top of the hill. We have no idea when it was made or why it was made so far up the hill, but one thing is certain, that was at the end of the hallway of trees that she was being led to. In fact, she was almost at the end of that hallway when the light disappeared. By the time we reached this clearing, there was no sense of presence of a ship or beings like I observed hours earlier. I said, whatever or whoever was here, they're gone now. We snapped several photographs using the night vision goggles and returned to tell the other two adults what we found. And I returned in the morning for daylight photos and to get a better sense of the area. The first thing I'd like to comment on is that once again, everyone in the group was distracted or were otherwise moved to different parts of the campsite to allow for her contact. This is common when a single person needs to be taken from a larger group of people. The second point is that I find it curious that when this woman broke the trance and the light vanished, it was after she called out my name. While this may be nothing more than her intention not to continue, it's actually the second time she had contact with extraterrestrials and called out my name to end it when she became frightened. Briefly, in the first instance, she was indoors with someone else and they were hiding behind a bed mattress. She told me they were coming for her and that she was going to be taken onto a craft. That's when she said to her visitors, "Todd said I don't have to go." This ended the encounter and they were left behind. They have apparently come for her before. During this camping incident, however, she decided against going on to the craft because she didn't want to leave her daughter behind, and that's when she called out my name because she knew it stopped them previously. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. I always love doing stories by this writer. He floods me with stories. I bet I've done more than a dozen, maybe 15 of his stories on this channel, and every single one of them is fascinating. They're not always in your face, kind of, the the blow your doors off kind of stories, but some of them are. And I just absolutely love reading his stories, and I want to thank Todd for sending those. And encourage him again, get those books published so I can buy one and read it, dude. I think people in the audience would be interested as well. Maybe he would even hire me to do the audio book. I would love to do that. All right, thank you guys for following along on this podcast. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.